In terms of cool, hip vampire movies to come out in the late 80s, Joel Schumacher's The Lost Boys is usually the go-to. It had an interesting story, cool characters, and some young talent in Kiefer Sutherland and Corey Feldman. However, believe it or not, there was actually another that came out the same year and had a similar type of vampire, Kathryn Bigelow's Near Dark. Yes, that Kathryn Bigelow. However, here, the story differs. Near Dark is about a guy who falls for a young woman in a small town. He tries to woo her, but it turns out she's a vampire and eventually bites him on the neck. Because of this, country boy Caleb Colton has to leave his family and ride with a pack of vampire drifters to satisfy his quench for human blood. Near Dark is a very interesting horror film. It's more complex than anything. It has some great drama, some good comedy, a touching romance, some good horror, and even hints of western here and there. Adrian Pasdar is very likable as the charming country boy Caleb. We see him as this young, confident guy at first, but then when he does get bitten and we see his world fall apart, it's nothing short of heartbreaking. Forcing him to do terrible things in order to survive, you just end up feeling sorrier for him. However, despite being evil bastards, the group of vampires are also weirdly likable. Lance Henriksen, Jeanette Goldstein, and Joshua Miller are the vampires, and they all do a good job. Ironically, Joshua Miller ended up writing The Final Girls. Kinda cool. However, the vampire that steals the show is Bill Paxton as Severin. He's such a fucking asshole, yet you can't help but laugh when he's on screen. He really steals the show and makes this movie, despite not being in the movie for a ton. Jenny Wright does a good job as May, and is a good companion for Caleb. She feels like the only vampire that still has a soul left, yet she still isn't afraid to kill someone when necessary. The love story between Caleb and May is a bit forced at first, but it's still nice to see them together, and they have good chemistry with one another. The makeup is fantastic when the vamps get all burned and shit. It's really cool. However, the actual fire effects look a bit dated and kind of fake looking. The story is very unconventional, as there really isn't a goal. It's pretty much just Caleb trying to live as a vampire. This movie could have benefited from a longer runtime to develop some of the characters a bit more. However, it's still a great vampire movie that deserves a little more recognition. Alright, I wanted to do this film again because I have now seen The Lost Boys and wanted to look back on this film and compare and contrast the two after a rewatch of Near Dark. Firstly, I will talk about The Lost Boys and what that did so differently compared to Near Dark. The Lost Boys is a movie that is almost overwhelmingly positive when it comes to the idea of vampirism. Oh my god, wouldn't it be absolutely fucking awesome to live forever and look young? So fucking cool. Not saying that's a bad thing, but it's nothing new. Just take every extreme 80s movie, sprinkle in the vampire lore, and there you go. You got Lost Boys. This is a movie that more often than not, you gotta watch as a kid to really love. Not a bad movie, but one that is pretty overrated, and compared to Near Dark, it doesn't even come close. If you want to know my further thoughts on Lost Boys, though, I left my Letterboxd review and a stream we did on the Cool Kids with the time code in the description below. It's an interesting comparison when it comes to the 1987 vampire flicks. As I said, Lost Boys is about the awesomeness of vampires, but still dealing with the negative impacts that comes with them, where they must be defeated by the end. Near Dark takes a darker and more nihilistic approach. While on the surface it may seem cool and awesome to be a vampire, they're really in a life of torment and pain, and honestly pretty pathetic. While they own the night, their cowardice is really on full display in the daytime. How they almost become frightened children in a way. It really takes the idea of the vampire curse and truly goes full in on the curse part. I think Caleb is seen as kind of bland, and while yes, he could have been better, I think the reason he is so absent of emotion in the first half is because he is so genuinely shocked by his situation and how his reality is now broken. So he doesn't really emote a ton. At least that's how I view it. Mainly because later on there is a bit more bite, no pun intended, to his performance. The film is more about the ideas when it comes to vampires, trying to break them down and looking at them through a new lens, like what George Romero did for vampires in Martin. It is a bit disjointed because of this, where it almost goes from situation to situation and scene by scene with not a ton of flow as the film goes on. I feel like there were a lot of missing scenes that could have made it flow better and develop the characters a bit more, like the relationship between Caleb and May. Their relationship is good, but it could have been better, especially when it starts off kinda rocky rocky, with Caleb being a bit of a creep. But in terms of the rest of the characters, Lance Henriksen, Jeanette Goldstein, Joshua Miller, and especially Bill Paxton are all fucking fantastic. As I mentioned, they really steal the show and are an absolute joy to watch. I just wish there was more of them because they're just so good. What I also like about the film is how you're not spoon-fed information. You get just enough to keep you intrigued, and it keeps you going, especially when it comes to their backstories. There's a bit, but your mind can fill in the rest.
How old are you?
Let's put it this way, I fought for the South.
South.
We lost.
Plus, the style is so fucking cool. The Western ideas are executed well and blends together with the horror very well, and the Tangerine Dream soundtrack is fucking great. It's not a perfect movie, but I think it's a movie that more so relies on deconstructing the idea of the vampire in a new way, rather than the plot that is being presented. Definitely an underrated flick, and a must-watch.